Hello, good morning, Isara. I hope you are enjoying Bratislava. I'm honored I've been invited to speak in front of such a wonderful audience. And before I start, I would like to say that a couple of days I've spent with you around this building and the other of our university, I felt included. And that's important because feeling of inclusion is something that equips us as adults and our students and children with important skills for their whole life. I've used this title, Stories of Inclusion, because stories are an important part of education and educational research. And it's important how we understand the stories and how we perceive the storytellers and their perspectives, because they tell us a lot about emotions and values behind the stories. And today I would like to give you a couple of different perspectives of stories of inclusion focused on learners with neurodivergent conditions. So it's about the stories. Let's start with a story. Once upon a time there was a man whose son suffered with difficulties in reading and concentration, and probably also stigmatization related to these overall difficulties. And that father wanted to change the perspective and maybe offer the world more positive representation of dyslexia his son suffered from. And so he published a series of stories showing dyslexia as something which is not a burden, not a problem, but something which is half divine ability. And those of you who have children or maybe students of teenage or young adult age, you may already know who I'm talking about. I'm talking about Rick Riordan and his Stories of Percy Jackson, a series of books and films quite popular around the world. And he used this idea of having a mind hardwired for something else. And in the real world, this is fantasy story, it's fiction. In the real world, people with dyslexia are probably not demigods. But it says a lot about how we perceive the idea of neurodiversity. The reality is another story. According to statistics from European institutions, individuals with special educational needs, including dyslexia, are in a situation that they face difficulties of being accepted at school, facing difficulties when they move from one level to another in education. They also, there is expectation that there is lower rate of employment of those individuals. And obviously, this situation affects millions of children we teach in schools. Their pathways from very early education to upper levels, university and occupation tends to be much more difficult and complicated compared to their peers in schools. Who are those children in general? It's a very diverse group of different conditions, including physical, cognitive, behavioral, affective difficulties, but also exceptional talents and giftedness, barriers in using language and living in different cultural, religious backgrounds, and also suffering from difficulties coming out of their environment, social environment, being part of excluded community and so on. And recently, statistics from different countries, and I will later show you some data from Slovakia too, show that those with neurodivergent conditions are an important portion of this group of special educational needs children. What is maybe a bit more specific with this group, and we will again come back to this, is the fact that this condition is very often invisible. Compared to other special educational needs, we can often see or hear the difference. But in case of learners with neurodivergent conditions, it's often hidden, and it makes it more difficult to express their stories and their needs. So, what is neurodiversity? I'm sure you have heard this term, but maybe you are not that much involved with the topic. So let's go a bit back to history. The first introduction of the theme of neurodiversity is connected with the name of Judy Singer, Australian social scientist who published her thesis in 1990s and had a couple of discussions and presentation on the idea of shifting the paradigm from pathologizing conditions of neurodiversity to seeing it as something that could be also strengths-based approach, could be seen as something that might be a gift sometimes, but seeing also stigmatization, barriers, and difficulties surrounding this condition around the world. And so the shift of the discussion from seeing just the pathology and deficit to seeing more complex view of the condition itself and also the reactions of environment, social dynamics of groups learners live in, made it a strong movement, which is not something clinical. It's not new approach to diagnosing people. It's social movement to support human rights of those groups of individuals. Concept of neurodiversity affects all humanity. In its very broad sense, it means that all of us are part of neurodiversity because each person approaches the world in a bit different way. And Judy Singer and many other experts who work with this concept highlight the fact that we can compare it with biodiversity. Biological systems are very diverse, very different, and when you see, I don't know, I'm not very much expert in biology, but I'm sure that butterflies are not all the same, even though they fit some sort of biological category. And it's very similar with understanding humanity. So in very broad sense, neurodiversity is something that covers all of us here. And it's advocacy term. It's not a diagnostic term. It's not new approach to clinical diagnosis. It's not replacing existing categories in psychology, medicine, or psychiatry. It's more like category that celebrates and acknowledges intersectional factors of both difficulties and possible advantages or disadvantages of being neurodivergent. It's also not a synonym of otherness or difference, even though people often experience being different, and our stories support this. It's not the main idea to see neurodiversity as something different, other or neurological disability. So the main idea behind is that all of us think, move, hear, perceive the world and process information in very unique way. And those who are labeled as neurotypical usually do this in a way which fits standard cultural norms, standard view of the world, some sort of normality. I don't like that word, but yeah. On the other hand, being neurodivergent means that something in your perception of the world or processing the world is out of the box of normality, maybe, out of the norm. It's conflicting with what society expects. We can use many different words how to explain this. So in a bit narrower way, we understand the neurodivergent population as those who perceive the world and process information in a way that is maybe not that common. And borrowing the quote from another fiction story, a fantasy story, for people who are neurodivergent, living in a society might mean that they live in a world which was not created for them. I'm sorry for not giving credit to the author of this quote. I don't know who the author is. I found it in a discussion group on social media. And those of you who are struggling to understand, it's from Harry Potter. and those Ravenclaws and Hufflepuffs are two faculties or two schools of Harry Potter stories. And Percy Jackson and Harry Potter are figures living in fantasy worlds where diversity is expressed metaphorically by different types of creatures with different magic they own. And it's helpful sometimes for children to understand the diversity of real world. It's not that much magic in it, maybe. Maybe it is, I don't know. But it may help children to understand through those stories what diversity means in real life. Being more scientific, scientists, experts use the term umbrella of diversity or neurodiversity umbrella to cover different types of conditions or clinical categories. Originally, this concept was connected mostly with autism, ADHD, and learning difficulties, learning disorders, including dyslexia, dyscalculia, dysgraphia, dyspraxia. Later on, other authors added many other conditions, and I just went through a couple of articles and books to name some of those. This list is not complete. It depends on what kind of book you open, and it's also something which is developing. The concept of neurodiversity is quite young compared to other concepts in psychology and education, about 30 years of discussions, and so different perspectives and different authors tell different stories and cover different conditions under this umbrella. But still, we can identify some patterns that are typical, and in diagnostic process or in education, we often perceive some similarities across these conditions. Maybe not in the diagnostic process itself, but in the classroom, we often see that, okay, that child was diagnosed with dyslexia and the other one with ADHD and the other one with communication disorders. And they may feel very similar signs of anxiety. And they may be isolated in the classroom. So the diagnostic category itself does not tell us always the whole story. And that is why the idea of neurodiversity seeks for similarities in this group that can be addressed both in education and society. In the classroom, we often see some typical behaviors. Let's call them misbehaviors if they break the rules, if they break the norm. They sometimes express some sort of conflict behavior, maybe avoidance, maybe we can see inattention. As I mentioned in one of the previous slides, statistics says that we also often see lower school achievement, differences in performance, but there are many other things hidden because, as I said, this condition is often invisible. And they often struggle with anxiety, but they might be very creative. They may bring completely new perspectives unexpected very often for us as teachers. They may have lower frustration tolerance, or they struggle with inferiority feelings, but it is something that is not that much obvious. It's often hidden. And in a book which has been published recently on neurodiversity in education, the authors discuss the concept of being part of neurominority as something that may lead to minority stress. The concept of minority stress is again used for different types of minorities, and those of you who are familiar with literature on queer or LGBTQ plus population, you may know that this term is often used with this group, but it may also apply to neurodivergent population. The similar thing with those LGBTQ plus communities is that their condition is invisible. It's connected with a lot of misconceptions and stigmatization. And experiencing stigmatization often leads to feeling negative emotions, feeling stress. And also, in one of our previous research studies, we focused also on rejection sensitivity. The feeling of expecting being rejected in a situation, because I experienced that before, so I expect being rejected again and again and again. And this is something that feeds the stress, minority stress in this group. So again, we are coming to a conclusion that the question of being different or being neurominority is not only something that comes out of the condition itself. It's something that is connected with the society we live in. And concept of neurodiversity or philosophy of neurodiversity draws on the concept of social model of disability. The traditional medical model explains disabilities in a way that it's certain deficit that can be fixed, cured, treated. Simply we can change the conditions if we use appropriate treatment, therapy, and so on. And the difficulties come usually from the condition itself. On the other hand, social model of disability says that it's not always true. We suffer from difficulties because society is not ready for our difficulty. The society is not creating conditions that could assist or help people to thrive if they are a bit different or if they suffer from something. The idea of philosophy of neurodiversity is closely connected with the social model. However, there is also the third perception, and this is connected again with the concept of of ecological system theory, which is well known and adopted in many fields of psychology and education. And this approach sees three different actors or agents in the condition of neurodiversity. It's the condition itself, it's the society, and also the individual. The person who is active part of the process. And neurodivergent individuals live in their microsystems of close family and school. And they go through different levels of society. They are also influenced by culture, law, state, the regulations, the way we are coming from different countries, and the way how we treat learners with special educational needs legally, policies that are connected with this, and Eleni mentioned that when she introduced me, are very different. They are not all the same in different countries. So it's also the part of understanding ourselves in the system. And what is important is the fact that all these things happen in temporal dynamics. It's not static. It happens in the course of time. And that is why in our research we focused on retrospective life stories of young adults with neurodivergent conditions to understand the temporal dynamics of the process of inclusion in their lives. Using this ecological systems theory, we can also speak about another concept, which is ecological neuropsychology. And again, it integrates different perspectives, conditions themselves, society, and individuals' role in this whole process. And according to recent research studies, we can see that, okay, maybe dyslexia can cause difficulties in reading, but dyslexia itself usually does not cause emotional burden, which is connected with reading loudly in front of other people. Sometimes it's a question of chicken and egg. We do not know which one was the first. But usually, based on the studies, emotional burdens are connected with society, while actual difficulties might be connected with condition itself. So in the light of these findings and recent discussions about disabilities and neurodiversity, we can ask the question, what is really inclusion? Oh, sorry. And what is not? For me, inclusion is not placing a square peg in a round hole. Inclusion could be, should be, inclusion is. First of all, understanding the fact that there are pegs of different shapes. And then the next step would be, metaphorically, of course, trying to help all the pegs find the hole they fit in. And a message for teachers and parents, this necessarily does not mean that we are responsible for crafting the holes for each shape. We are responsible for creating conditions and guiding children to find the hole and maybe co-craft the hole they fit in. And now I would like to, after this general introduction, I would like to bring you closer to Slovak context. I have a question first, just to grasp your attention. Please raise your hands who are first-time visitors to Slovakia. Wow, please take pictures. Thank you for coming. Okay, light. So, a few facts about Slovakia. This is a map. The red square is Bratislava, where we are now. Our country has a population of roughly 5.5 million, and about 900,000 of those are learners, students, children and youth from 3 to 18 years of age. And according to the recent report on mental health published by Slovak Research Institute of Child Psychology and Pathopsychology, recently published already in June this year, 10.6% of those are learners with special educational needs, educated in both streams, mainstream and special education. And you can see the further numbers. 2.5% in pre-primary education, kindergartens from 3 to 6, primary and lower secondary education, which is in our country from 6 to 15 with 2 different levels, 14%, and about 9.7 in secondary education from 15 to 19. We do not have exact numbers from universities, but they are much lower, maybe lower than pre-primary education. I'm not going to explain much about the data here, but it's obvious that in pre-primary education, not all the conditions are diagnosed, identified, plus not all the children attend whole period of pre-primary education, so it makes the numbers lower. While compulsory education, which is 10 years in Slovakia, from 6 to roughly 15, depending on some individual differences, in compulsory education we see the strongest proportion of those learners. In secondary education, the pathways could be different. Sometimes they do not register as learners with special educational needs for many reasons. Sometimes they do not continue in secondary education, they leave the system. So the reasons for those numbers are complex. Let's see the individual conditions again. I'm using the terminology based on the report, and maybe in your countries you use a bit different terminology to address different categories. But you can see that roughly half of this proportion of learners with special educational needs are those with neurodivergent conditions. And if we include also communication disorders, which is not always included in this group, it would be around 60%. So it makes it relevant to study this group because it's high proportion and a big group in our educational system. And that is why we decided to design a project to understand and to study the pathways of neurodivergent learners from early education to university. This project had several parts, and we have a couple of data sets, but I'm going to talk about a qualitative one in which we collected 28 life story interviews with higher education students who were diagnosed or identified as neurodivergent learners in the course of their school history, most of them in early childhood. The group, the participant sample covered 7 different neurodivergent conditions with the highest proportion of learning disorders, dyslexia, dyscalculia, dysgraphia, and ADHD, and some of the participants reported a couple of different conditions. We applied idiographic phenomenological approach to understand their lived experience with the educational system and family and all the conditions or social context around their situation. Before I start with our data, I'm using a quote from the research in the UK. United Kingdom colleagues run a similar project with students of psychology and their special educational needs conditions. And they asked similar questions, whether universities could be really inclusive environments, because we often talk about lower levels of education where inclusion is important because it's for whole society, it's compulsory education. University is something extra, and so universities often do not adopt these trends. It's changing in the world and in Slovakia too. But in the course of history, it was not always the case. And so they asked a similar question, and it was interesting to see that some participants reported not to be understood even in studying psychology, meeting experts in the field. And it again highlights and underlines the fact that it's not easy to study as a neurodivergent individual. So let's go to the data from our project. First of all, our participants reported feelings of otherness and being different. And this was manifested in two different ways. The first one was connected with identity or perceiving self as being troublemakers. They often told us stories from their early childhood, from kindergarten, school, or families, saying, okay, I was always misbehaving, and I was always set as a bad example. Don't follow this behavior, this is bad behavior. That was something they heard very often. And obviously, this influenced the way how they perceive themselves as being excluded, separated, and not being example of good behavior. And it was typical for ADHD learners, but also in other groups we observed this. Another message they got from the environment was being not intelligent enough, clever enough, not engaged enough. And it led to questioning their cognitive capacities and to questioning their motivation to work, because they were often labeled as lazy, not good enough, and they questioned whether they are really good enough to study further, and that could be the reason for lower numbers in higher secondary education and universities, that sometimes they felt discouraged from further studying. Another message supports the idea of medical model understanding of neurodivergent conditions. We need to fix you. You need to practice a lot. We had one participant who told me a story of crying every day after school because all the friends were outside playing, and he was forced to do the exercises to read better. And at the same time, they were trained to compensate their difficulties, to concentrate better, to stop misbehaving and running around, to read faster or making less mistakes in dictations, but they were not guided how to live with the condition itself. What does it mean being dyslexic or autistic or whatever? And this is something that expressed as missing in their overall pathways in education. Teach me how to live with my condition. I don't need to be taught how to read fast, because, you know, technology does it for me if I need. Nowadays with AI, it's pretty easy. But living with condition is not that easy, and AI is not doing this for us. And it leads us to another problem they faced, and it's sharing question. Our participants experienced different stories of sharing information about their diagnosis, their conditions. Sometimes parents didn't want to share, even with family or schools or close friends, because it was stigma, it was bad label. On the other hand, they often experience oversharing, telling everyone, talking about me without my consent. And that is, again, something that strongly affected their pathways to university and occupation. They learned that if it's overshared, it could be a burden. It could be harmful very often. And so they try to find their ways how to deal with information. And message for us maybe is that, that there is currently discussed trend on social media, which is called share renting. You may heard about it, sharing pictures of children online without their consent and creating their digital footstep without their consent and participation in it. And with those conditions, it's something similar. We often create sort of footstep of our children without their consent, without talking with them first. I know it's pretty difficult with young children, but still we should be aware of the fact that it's their life and it's part of their decision how to share information about my condition. And it affected them strongly in their issues of disclosure and help seeking in their young adult and adult lives. And typical story from our data set was that, okay, I want to manage my disclosure and help seeking myself, and I want to prove I'm good enough. I do not want to ask for help because it sometimes did not work well in my previous history. And that is something we again face in a university setting. We have many students who do not finish their studies. There is high attrition in this group of students. They often change the field of study because they struggle with help seeking, and we cannot do much with it because it's heritage of their previous experiences. Another strong message was that it's still there. The condition is not something that disappears just by snapping your fingers. It's still there, and sometimes the treatment and interventions in early childhood are aimed to fix the child, but you are never fixed fully. And students share the stories, for example, this one, I use that quote, of having difficulties to write messages and posts on social media because of feeling anxious about the reaction of the group, the community, because of making mistakes. So it's always there, and we should help children, as I mentioned before, to craft the holes they fit in because it builds resilience and strategies for further life. And despite talking about a lot of negative experiences of this group, for me it was fascinating. What was the proportion of students who decided to study helping professions and education, even though they had difficulties and they experienced stigmatization in school? They decided to go for this career because they believed that they can make a change. They can be empathetic enough to understand parents and families with neurodivergent learners and other special educational needs. And going further beyond our data, going back again to the research from the UK, maybe neurodivergent professionals are those who can question traditional models and challenge them and see psychology, education, or any other field through a bit different lenses. So these are a few facts from our research and few ideas. And I would like to come to the third part, a couple of take-home messages from all this. I have just three. Okay, the first one is inspired again by the book of Alice and colleagues. And we know that being neurodivergent means that there are a lot of barriers around you. And we can do three different things as educators and parents. We can reduce the barrier, we can remove it, or we can rethink it. Let's imagine a situation with the classroom rules. You may have a rule that children are not allowed to move around the class during the activity. And we know that there is a neurodivergent individual who struggles with that role really strongly. What we can do? Okay, we can reduce the time. We can say, okay, the others have to sit still for 20 minutes, and for you, 10 would be enough. We can remove the barrier. We can say, okay, the others are sitting for 20 minutes, and you are not supposed to sit still, because we know that you cannot make it. It sounds inclusive, right? Or not? For me, not. Because the child then feels being neurominority, having different conditions. And if we rethink the rule, and if we think, okay, is it really necessary to sit still for 20 minutes? We can have a break, all of us. We can do something, we can move, we can arrange it in a bit different way. It's not always easy to rethink all the rules and teaching methods and stuff. But good news is that we don't have to change everything at the same moment. We can make small steps. And those curb cut effects then work. It's a quick win for everyone. The picture here is from the place where I live here in Bratislava. It's a pavement close to my apartment. And probably it was designed to help people with disabilities to move around to cross the street. I myself appreciated many times as a biker, as a mother with pram, as a granddaughter taking care of my grandmother on a wheelchair, as a lady coming to the theater on high heels, for example. There are many situations when we can benefit from small changes. Even though they might be primarily designed for neurodivergent individuals, they may be very useful for general population too. Another moment, another message is connected with psychological safety. Psychological safety is a concept which is recently discussed in occupational psychology, organizational psychology, but also in schools. And the main idea behind is that it's a belief that in a group where I live, I feel safe enough to take interpersonal risks. I feel very safe here now. And my English is obviously not excellent, and maybe I missed something I planned to tell you, but still I feel safe enough to take the risk. And if we create social conditions in the classrooms that children feel safe enough to disclose, to articulate their needs, to make mistakes, of course, then the accommodations and help comes easier to the recipient. Plus, building psychologically safe schools, it's not only a question of children, it's also a question of staff. In our research, we had participants with neurodivergent conditions who worked in school setting. And they had kind of confusing, ambivalent feelings about being there. They are empathetic, they support building inclusive environments, but on the other hand, they feel the stigmatization and they feel maybe negative reactions from parents or other staff. They're, okay, how can you teach children being dyslexic? Oh, you struggle with grammar and spelling, you cannot teach that. So it's kind of ambivalent situation for them. And to build inclusive schools and classrooms, we need to give voice to those individuals. And it's not only children, it's also neurodivergent stuff. And the last message is about the stories again, going back to stories. Each desk in your classroom tells a story. Based on the statistics from Slovakia, at least one story in standard classroom is neurodivergent story, but there are many others. And we as teachers are used to be storytellers, not that much listeners. And it's important to listen to the stories because sometimes children fail in sending us understandable messages about their needs. And it's pretty hard to decode them. And I like the symbol of paper plane as a message from the classroom. I'm not very good at designing paperwork. I'm not sure if mine flies. Well, not that much. And this is the message. Sometimes children send messages and we do not understand them. They are fragile and they do not fly the right way. And so we have to be very empathetic and careful listeners to understand those messages. Talking about paper planes, do you know how many paper planes were there in my presentation? Any guesses? 16, 20? More? 25, more than 25? Okay, 31. And the number is not just coincidence. 28 for our participants in our research, and the 3 others for 3 boys that inspired my presentation. Percy Jackson, Harry Potter, and one of my former students. And this is the last story I'm going to tell you. It happens to me some time ago that a student came after my presentation and said, "Well done, miss. Good presentation. Unfortunately, I do not remember much of the content, but," and then he added overwhelming statistics of graphic features in my slides. And this was a very subtle message of neurodiversity. So I wish you to be good listeners to the stories from your classes, to help your students to build successful stories of inclusion. Thank you for your attention.